All right, I think this is a good time to go ahead and start. So I want to start by saying good evening, everyone. My name is Selma Alford. I'm with the Mississippi State Department of Health, and I currently served as the lead in the Hispanic Task Force against COVID-19 under the Health Equity Response Team. And today I'll be serving as your moderator. We're going to go through a few housekeeping rules, but before anything, I want to instruct anybody that their language of preference today is Spanish. We do have an interpreter available. So if you go down in the bottom of your Zoom, you'll see a globe. You click Spanish and you'll be hearing everything in Spanish. And I'll say that right now in Spanish. So, muy buenas tardes, querida comunidad. Mi nombre es Selma Alford. Yo estoy trabajando con el Departamento de Salud y sirvo como la LED del task de los hispanos para COVID-19. Una instrucción bien rápida, si usted desea escuchar esta información en español, abajo del Zoom hay un globo. Presione español y va a escuchar todo lo que desea en español. Nuevamente, abajo en la pantalla del Zoom va a haber un globo. Presione español y va a poder escuchar todo en el videoconferencia en español. Si prefiere escucharlo en inglés, se mantiene en este canal y escuchará toda la información en inglés. Les estoy dando unos cuantos minutos para si necesitan cambiar el idioma, lo puedan hacer, o si tienen alguna preguntita cómo hacerlo, se le puede hacer. I'm giving everybody a few more minutes. If they need to change the language of preference, they can do so. All right, so this town hall is being recorded. Please remember to keep your microphones on mute during the town hall. Questions have been prepared for the panelists to discuss. However, if you would like to have any additional questions or comments, please place them on the chat box. During the presentation, there'll be important information about COVID-19 vaccination. We hope to empower the community during this pandemic by directly informing them of resources available on how the state is fighting against COVID-19. This evening, you'll be hearing from Dr. Dobbs. He's our state health officer. Dr. Leonardo Mena. He's the chair and professor of population of health and science in the University of Mississippi Medical Center. You'll also be hearing from Dr. Adolfo Correa. He's the director of Jackson Heart Studies, professor of medicine and population and health and science at the University of Mississippi Medical Center. You'll also be hearing of Dr. Nelson Atejorta de la Pena. We like to call him Dr. A or Dr. Nelson. He is with the Jackson State University and College of Health and Science. Each of them will speak on specific topics surrounding COVID-19 vaccinations, targeting the Hispanic and Latin communities. Once again, I want to remind everyone that if your language of preference is Spanish, we don't want you to miss out on anything. And if you can go ahead and please click on that globe in the bottom of the Zoom and click your language of preference, so you'll be able to hear all this information with understanding. So, nuevamente quiero recordarles que si su lenguaje preferido es español, por favor presione abajo en el globo para que escuchen y para seleccionar el lenguaje que prefieren más, para que así no puedan perder nada de la información. With that in mind, we'll start with our very own health state officer, Dr. Thomas E. Dobbs III. Dr. Dobbs has previously served at MSDH for many years in the role of district health officer and state epidemiologist. He holds a doctor of medicine and a master's in public health from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. He is board certified in internal medicine and infectious disease. Prior to joining the Department of Health, Dr. Dobbs worked as an internal medicine and infectious disease physician in Laurel in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. He is a member of the Mississippi State Medical Association and Infection Disease Society of America, and is an associate professor at the UMMC School of Population Health. Dr. Dobbs became our state health officer, my apologies, in 2018. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Dr. Dobbs, whenever you're ready, it's your show.
I got it now. All right. Buenas noches a todos. Yo soy Dr. Dobbs.
El Dr. Dobbs habla español.
Sí, un poquito. Yo puedo entender muy bien, pero yo no puedo hablar muy bien. So, por favor, yo voy a escuchar en español y hablar en inglés. Okay. So good night to everybody. Please feel free to speak in Spanish, and I can usually understand pretty much everything, but my ability to speak is far more limited. So we'll talk a little bit about the vaccine and kind of where we are with the COVID vaccine. So we're very excited to have two highly effective COVID vaccines. There are two companies that make them. One of them is the Pfizer vaccine, and one of them is the Moderna vaccine. And they both require 2 shots. And if you receive both shots, we have evidence that it provides about 95% immunity from coronavirus, which is absolutely fantastic. We have received a modest but steady supply of coronavirus vaccine. And if you can see here on the bottom of my slide, we've had a steadily increasing number of folks who have been receiving the coronavirus vaccine. And we plan to continue this good progress that we've made over previous weeks. We have had good progress in certain areas, especially if you consider people who are over 75. Of the people who are over 75 years of age in Mississippi, we have now immunized about 35% of the whole population, which is fantastic. That's very important because we know people over 75 are at very high risk for severe illness or even death. Approximately 10% of people over 75 diagnosed with coronavirus will go on to die. That is far too high, and we need to protect this vulnerable population as quickly as possible. We also know that people over 65 are at very high risk for getting coronavirus and dying. So we also want to make sure that we immunize people over 65. And if you look at the total group of everyone over 75, we have now immunized about 24% of the entire population of people in Mississippi who are over 75 years of age. So that's good news, and we anticipate we'll continue to make progress. Currently, people who are eligible to receive coronavirus vaccine in Mississippi are people who are 65 years of age and older, or people who are between the ages of 16 and 64 and have one of several severe chronic medical conditions, including diabetes, heart disease, or obesity, as defined as a body mass index of 30 or higher. If we look at the population of Mississippi that currently qualifies for the vaccine, we know that about 1.4 million people in Mississippi, close to half of the population, qualifies based on these criteria. So many people are able to sign up for the vaccine. The challenge is, we have multiple challenges, but one of the challenges is that we don't get that much vaccine on a weekly basis. We don't sit on a pile of vaccine. We use it as quickly as we can get it. And we have seen that we can only cover about 3% of the eligible population in a week. So only a small percentage of people who are eligible to receive the vaccine are able to get it because there's just not that much vaccine out there. If we look at how the vaccine has been distributed so far across the state, you can see that we have at least almost 200,000 people have received at least one dose of vaccine, which is fantastic. We've given a total of 216,000 vaccines in Mississippi, including first and second doses. You can see certain counties where people have received vaccine, and there is wide variability in the number of vaccines by population. Now, some of it makes sense that Hinds County, which is the most populous county in the state, would receive the most vaccine. If you look on the southern coast, you can see that some of the coastal counties have received a lot of vaccine. But Hancock County has not really received that much, and proportional to their population is kind of low, as an example. And then if we look at certain subsets of the population, we see that we have very severe disparities by race and ethnicity. You can see here that if we look at people who identify as Black or African American, only 16% of the vaccine has gone to folks who are Black or African American. The majority have been people who identify as white. The population of Mississippi is about 37% Black, so this is far too low proportional to their population in the state. We also have a high proportion of people who claim other, and we can talk about that later, but many of these people are probably African American, but not all of them. Here is a very stark statistic here. If we look at Hispanic, only 1% of people receiving the vaccine in Mississippi identify as Hispanic. We know that very many people who are of Hispanic ethnicity have a higher rate of diabetes and have a higher rate of bad outcomes, and also have a higher rate of infection. So we need to get more and more folks who identify as Hispanic vaccinated. We've only gotten about 1,600. We have a long way to go. So how do people get vaccinated? There are numerous ways to get vaccinated. We do have multiple drive-through sites throughout the state, as you can see in these blue triangles. Now, that's good if you live near one of these blue triangles, but it's not so good if you live in some of the counties, like maybe Montgomery County and you're far away, or maybe even in Alcorn County. If you want to sign up for a drive-through, and if you are eligible, we want you to go to covidvaccine.umc.edu. UMC has been a fantastic partner with our scheduling effort. And you can go in here and you can sign up online. Or there's a phone number on this website will tell you how to get vaccine. And I can actually put that phone number in the chat for anybody who wants it. But in addition, we are trying to share vaccine with many clinical partners. Up in Alcorn County, we are giving vaccine to the Magnolia Medical Center, but also the community health centers that are operating in this area. We have given a lot of vaccine to Jackson Hines Community Health Center. We have given a lot of vaccine to Scott and Leake County through the Baptist Medical Center, and they've had drive-through clinics and would encourage you to use those as you are eligible. So we will have these drive-through clinics, but we have numerous other partner areas, but we need all Mississippians who qualify, especially people who are of Hispanic ethnicity, to sign up and get the vaccine when it's your turn. And I'm not going to talk much more than that. I know we have a lot to talk about today, but I'm going to go ahead and stop here and turn it over to the moderator and our other speakers so that we can continue with this conversation. Thank you, Selma.
Thank you, Dr. Dobbs. I think we learned a lot. I went ahead and put the website, MSDH website, on the chat box for anyone to go ahead and look into for any vaccinations. And I will be placing the one for the testing as well. If you decide to go ahead and you want to get tested, we definitely want to make sure we provide those services. And that
there is a
testing,
Spanish language version on the website. So if you
yes.
go on, you can do that. And if you call the phone line, we have translators for Spanish, Vietnamese, and one of 50 languages.
Yes, that is correct, Dr. Dobbs. That I did went ahead and I put it in, and I did click on the Spanish site as well. So once again, thank you, Dr. Dobbs. I don't think anybody could have given us better information than you. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick once again. So, we're going to go ahead and move on with our very own Dr. Leonardo Mena. I like saying his name in Spanish better than English, and my R's rolls better. So, el doctor, see, I'm getting ready to enter that Spanish world. Dr. Leonardo Mena is a clinician research and a public health advocate with expertise in prevention and clinical management of sexual transmitted disease, STDs, and the human immunodeficiency. I'm sorry, I know I messed that up. Virus such as HIV. He's a founding chair of the Department of Population Health Science in the University of Mississippi Medical Center with John D. Bowers School of Population Health and professor of medicine in the Division of Infectious Disease. He directs the Center for HIV/AIDS Research, Education and Policy at the Maryland Everest William Institute for Elimination of Health Disparity. He serves as a medical director of the 5 Points Clinic with Jackson Public School STD clinics, and co-founded Open Arms Healthcare Center, first LGBT clinic in Mississippi, by the way. In recognition to his work developing of models, programs of culturally competent HIV prevention and care of Black men who have sex with men, which is being replicated in other clinics of the country, he was awarded the 2016 Achievement Award by the Gay and Lesbian Medical Association, the GLMA. He's boarded certified in infectious disease. Dr. Mena is the research fellow with the Rural Center for STDs, HIV Prevention with Indiana University. Dr. Mena has been involved in studies evaluating the racial ethnic disparities observed in the COVID-19 pandemic in the US, and is the principal investigator of several COVID-19 epidemiologic prevention and treatment research studies. I don't think there's anybody more capable of going through this and educating us on COVID-19 vaccination and clinical trials surrounding our community. So Dr. Mena, it's your show now.
Good morning, good evening, buenas noches a todos. And thank you, Selma, for inviting me to be part of this panel with certainly, a number of very qualified panelists that really we all want to make sure that people understand the importance, right, of getting vaccinated, as COVID-19 has really disproportionately affected, communities of color. There's plenty of data throughout the United States. The Latinos are both, because of occupational reasons, sometimes a much higher risk of becoming, infected with COVID. But also, because of Dr. Ross mentioned, a higher proportion of Latinos who are living with diabetes or some other chronic diseases, very often, untreated chronic diseases because of a limited access to health services. These individuals are high risk if infected, becoming ill. So today I'm going to talk about, Selma, are you guys going to put my slides?
Yes, give me 1 second.
So today I'm going to talk about for a few minutes, about the how the clinical trials work. I mean, the studies, where how we learned that were done to help us, understand and develop these vaccines and make sure that we, learn that they were effective. Dr. Dobbs mentioned the 2 vaccines that we have available right now are actually over 90% effective if given, the 2 doses. And we also wanted to make sure that they were also safe. So shortly after COVID, came up around March, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which is part of the National Institute of Health, formed the COVID Prevention Trial Network. And the network, next slide, please. And the network was really, it was designed to enroll thousands of volunteers for the large-scale, phase 3 clinical trials, testing a variety of investigational vaccines and monoclonal antibodies, to protect people from COVID. The networks, pretty much merged, 4 existing, NIAID, funded clinical trial networks that included the HIV vaccine trial network that is based in Seattle, Washington, the HIV Prevention Trial Network that is based on Durham, North Carolina, the Infectious Disease Clinical Research Consortium that is based in Atlanta, Georgia, and the AIDS Clinical Trial Group that is based in Los Angeles, California. So the individual networks will continue to perform, their own clinical trials on HIV vaccine and prevention and other infectious diseases. But in addition to that, they were really mandated or they assumed their role, on the new COVID roles. So this is actually, next slide, please. So this slide is actually a little bit outdated, but the most important point is that here you can see the five vaccines that were into clinical trial through the coronavirus, vaccine network. You guys know already about the Moderna vaccine. The Pfizer vaccine is not listed here because Pfizer operated its own clinical trial independently of the public-private partnership that was developed to run these vaccines. And as you guys know, both Moderna and Pfizer are already commercially available. AstraZeneca is also approved, not available in the United States yet, but it is available in the United Kingdom for vaccination. And we know that the Janssen vaccine, which had the privilege and honor really to be a principal investigator here in Jackson, Mississippi, we will know probably its results, sometime later next week. The Novavax vaccine trial is scheduled to start soon. And the Sanofi Pasteur has been a little bit delayed, in part because we now have all these effective vaccines. So how the studies are going to be designed has to take into consideration the possibility that many people, will be vaccinated. When they, during the time that these vaccine studies are being performed. But if you see here, look at the number of people that are being enrolled for each one of these studies. We're talking about 30,000 individuals, 45,000, 30,000, 30,000. I think it's unprecedented. I mean, in terms of the number of individuals or volunteers that are being enrolled in the study, with the main purpose of making sure that we really have good quality data into how effective the vaccines are, and that we have good quality data into how safe the vaccines are. Next slide, please. So this slide, for any kind of product, especially a vaccine, before any test is done in humans, they're testing animal models. And once the animal model suggests that there could be some effectiveness and that is, safe, relatively safe in animals, then we move into the human studies. And human studies, are divided between phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Those are the required for a vaccine or any product to be approved. And then after approval, there's some other phases called phase 4 or even phase 5. But let's focus on the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. The phase 1, is the first studies that are done that involve a very small number of individuals. Most of the time it's 12, 24 people. They're typically healthy volunteers, and they're basically designed, to get people who are really healthy, and to test, if these new products or vaccines, right, are safe and they have any kind of immune response. Do this work at all, right? So once that phase 1 is completed, and in normal times takes 12 to 18 months, the process of analyzing the data and getting ready for the next phase, then you have the phase 2 studies that involve then hundreds of volunteers to identify what is the best dose and vaccine administration schedule. So this is when you decide whether you can give a vaccine a single dose, or if you need one booster and when you need a booster, or maybe you need 2 boosters. So that's why we have vaccines that can be given as a single dose. That's why we have vaccines that can be given with one booster that's given 21 days later or 28 days later. Or, there are some vaccines, not necessarily COVID, but I can think about, for example, the hepatitis, B vaccine that is given, a baseline 1 month and then another booster 6 months later. So this is how the phase 2 trials are good for. And they typically include, a couple hundred individuals. But then the phase 3 trials, involve many thousands of volunteers to test the safety and efficacy of the vaccine. And they really can last, for over 2 years. These are the studies that we're talking about. The studies that we're talking about, now are the phase 3 studies, and that really are trying to answer, the main question: does this vaccine or product work to protect people against getting severe COVID illness or from getting SARS-CoV-2, which is the name of the virus that causes, COVID-19. So you probably, heard in the news, that these vaccines, these COVID studies have been done really faster than they usually do. But I think it's important to understand that that not a single step has really been skipped. And what happened is that we changed a little bit the structure on how this work is done. So so we could start, the next phase as soon as we have the safety data collected and analyzed from the previous phase. The second thing is that I don't think that we have ever in history had the opportunity to test a vaccine when we have, in the middle of a pandemic, right? Sometimes you have to recruit, participants and follow them for 5, 6, 7 years, to identify enough people who get the infection so you can see whether the vaccine works or not. Right now, we're having hundreds of thousands of cases of COVID, right? That really allows to, within 2 months, quickly find out whether the vaccine works or not. So that's kind of the reason why that really we have had an unprecedented speed by which we, being able to conduct these clinical trials. So at the end, there is a really, it's also important to know that there is a very careful, throughout these studies, there's a very careful evaluation by a number of organizations that really oversee these trials, including the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, the United States Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, that carefully, review every study protocol to make sure that it is safe to move from one safe to the next. Next slide, please. Next slide. So in addition to that, I mean, there are a number of safety checkpoints in every study, including by the institutional review boards. That is an administrative body that established, to protect the rights and welfare of clinical trial participants. They review the protocol before and during, giving recommendations on how the studies can be done in a way that is really safe. In addition to that, each study has what is called a data safety monitoring board. That is an unbiased group of experts who are not appointed by the government, who who are independent of, of the sponsor of the study, that constantly, really are reviewing data from the study in real time while the study is ongoing. And they have the power to stop the study for a number of safety issues. They can stop the study if the vaccine is not working, or they can stop the study actually if they find that the vaccine is working so well that there is no point to give people, placebo. So then you have, the FDA advisory board reviews, all the, it's comprised of a group of professionals that will, these professionals are scientists in virology, clinical trials, statisticians, that they meet at least, for a couple of days with the sole purpose of conducting a comprehensive review of all the data provided by the DSMB, or the Data Safety Monitoring Board, and the company, the sponsor. They scrutinize, and every single detail of the data, and they deliberate, and decide whether these drugs, or these vaccines, are effective and safe. And this is the process that you guys saw when the FDA gave what is called emergency access utilization approval, right, to the vaccine developed by Moderna and the vaccine developed by Pfizer. So in addition to that, after vaccine is being given to people, there is another a group, is the vaccine, there is another checkpoint, the vaccine adverse event reporting system, which is a reporting system where even after the vaccine is approved, right, the FDA requires the manufacturers, the companies, to put together a plan to monitor for side effects of the vaccine downstream as people are being receiving it. This program is run by the Center for Disease Control and the FDA, and anyone, can submit a report of an adverse event, including patients receiving the vaccine as well as their doctors. So, for example, like Dr. Dobbs, I got my vaccine with him. I was one of the first people to get the vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, and I enroll in this program. Every week, I get a link, a survey that I complete asking me how am I doing. So they're monitoring the long term, not only the 30,000 of people who are in the clinical trial, but the people who are getting the vaccine, making sure that the vaccines, again, providing further assurance of the safety of the vaccine. But at the end, I think, researchers, scientists, and doctors really are working hard to make sure that we have a safe and effective vaccine for coronavirus. This disease that is really devastating, our communities in many ways, not only the disease itself, but the impact of the pandemic, measures, are bringing, to our lives. So at the end, the most important decision maker really is each one of you. Only each one of you can decide to participate in some of these trials, but also only you can decide to get vaccinated. Now that we have, 2 vaccines approved. You can decide, how you will protect yourself and your loved ones during this pandemic. And we're just here, to help you make the decision with the facts, no politics, no conspiracy theories, but the facts that you need to decide how you will show up for yourself and your loved ones in this pandemic. Next slide. I think this is information where there's lots of information in Spanish about the vaccines and the coronavirus prevention network. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mena, for sharing all your knowledge. I think this is a great time to let everybody know out there in the audience that the Department of Health is putting out a survey. We call it the SEAL survey, and it's regarding vaccinations. We do want to hear your thoughts, your concerns, your opinions regarding this vaccination, and how do you feel comfortable in the reasoning behind? So I am posting it on the chat box. I am putting there the English version, the Spanish version, because we are in a Spanish town hall that's directed for the Hispanic community. And I will also post there the Vietnamese as well, because we want to make sure we're culturally aware, and we don't ever know who's out there. And you might be Vietnamese, and you will prefer to fill it out in your own native language. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and proceed with Dr. Correa. Give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen real quick. And for those of you who prefer to hear, once again, this information, let me remind everybody, we do have interpreters available on hand that is interpreting everything that's being said. Please go down in the little glove. There's a little glove right there, and hit the preference of your language. I understand that the medical professional might be Hispanic, but in this very present form, we are catering and we are modifying it, and specifically targeting the Hispanic Latin communities. But we also want to go ahead and have a nice panel discussion about some other subjects that's coming up. So we're almost there, y'all. So give me 1 second. There it goes. So once again, like I said, we're going to move forward with Dr. Correa. He is going to be speaking about studies and advantages and disadvantages of the COVID vaccination. I think that's a huge concern within the community, regardless if you're Spanish, Black, white, Asian. We all want to make sure that it's safe for us. Dr. Correa is the director and principal of investigators of the Jackson Heart Study. He also served as a professor of medicine, pediatrics, and population health and science at the University of Mississippi Medical Center in Jackson. Dr. Correa has been affiliated with the Jackson Heart Study in UMMC since 2011. He's a native of Mexico who's completed his training in medicine at the University of California, San Diego, in pediatrics at San Francisco General Hospital, and the University of California, San Francisco, in the public health and epidemiology and preventive medicine at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. Before joining the Jackson Heart Study in 2011, Dr. Correa served as an epidemic intelligence service officer with the Center of Disease Control and Prevention at CDC, as an associate professor of epidemiology at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, and as the medical officer with the CDC. His current research focuses on epidemiology of obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular health, and COVID-19. So we're gonna go ahead and give the floor on to Dr. Correa.
Muy buenas tardes. Muchas gracias, Selma, por la invitación y darme esta oportunidad de hacer unos comentarios sobre la vacuna, las ventajas y desventajas de la vacuna de COVID en la población, en la comunidad latina, que como comentaron los doctores Dobbs y Mena, es una comunidad de alto riesgo de tener esta infección y también alto riesgo de desarrollar infecciones severas. Muy bien. So in order to talk about the advantages and disadvantages or benefits and risk of the vaccine, for the COVID infection, it's important to have some background or context. And so this context includes the rationale for vaccination. So vaccines aim to reduce the risks of getting a disease by working with your body's natural defenses or immune system to build protection. So when you get a vaccine, your immune system responds and develops a memory so that your body will be protected against infection from future exposure to the agent. And what are the requirements of a vaccine? According to the World Health Organization, a vaccine must provide a highly favorable benefit to risk ratio, that is more benefits than risks, with high efficacy, that is that the vaccine actually produces protection in most people, and only mild or transient reactions or adverse effects and no serious ailments or reactions. In addition, to recognize that there's a fair amount of experience with vaccines over the past century. Many infections that used to cause major epidemics and much suffering around the world in the last century, for example, smallpox, polio, measles, mumps, rubella, and influenza, have been largely controlled through vaccines. And it's also important to recognize that before COVID-19, as Dr. Mena indicated, vaccines used to take many years to be developed and tested for safety and efficacy before they could be offered to the general public. So in talking about advantages and disadvantages or benefits and risks of COVID-19 vaccine, it's important to ask the question, what evidence do we have to talk about this? So right now, the available evidence of benefits and risks comes primarily from clinical trials, which are studies, as Dr. Mena pointed out, that evaluate the efficacy and safety under ideal conditions. Now, in addition to clinical trials that can provide such evidence, there can be also studies of performance of the vaccine in the general population, that is the effectiveness in the general population and the real conditions, and also for the occurrence of less frequent reactions that may not be captured in observed in a clinical trial. But those studies of performance of vaccine in the general population are underway right now. The vaccines have been implemented in the general population, so the data are now being collected to see, well, what's the evidence of effectiveness and severe reactions in the general population. And so far, there seems to be a good indication that, as Dr. Dobbs pointed out, that the vaccines seem to be effective in the general population. So some key points about COVID-19 vaccines. Like all vaccines in general use, COVID-19 vaccines were tested for safety and efficacy before being authorized for use in the United States. So this is an important point to remember when thinking about whether or not to be vaccinated, or if you have concerns about being vaccinated. The vaccine has been tested for safety and efficacy, and so far the evidence says that they're safe and efficacious. The authorized COVID-19 vaccines do not contain a live virus and do not carry a risk of causing the disease in a vaccinated person. So also COVID-19 vaccines can have some side effects, and the more common ones include redness, swelling, or pain around the injection site. Less common reactions are fatigue, fever, headache, and aching limbs. But these side effects are usually mild and subside after a few days, like maybe 3 days or so. So in summary, what can we say about benefits and risk of COVID-19 vaccines? Well, in terms of benefits, the vaccines reduce the risk of infection. They reduce the risk of complications from infection. They reduce the risk of carrying the virus and exposing others, your family. They help build immunity in the population, in the community, and therefore accelerate the end of the pandemic and the associated suffering and cost from the pandemic. In terms of risks, as I mentioned, the vaccines can produce some common side effects, which are generally mild and of short duration. We don't know at this point what the risk for people with a history of allergic reactions to vaccines. I think that people need to talk to their physicians. If they have a history of allergic reactions to vaccines, they should talk to their physicians about whether or not they recommend them getting the vaccine for COVID-19. And I think that possibly the one recommendation would be to go ahead and get the vaccine, but do it under conditions that you can be monitored for an allergic reaction. And if an allergic reaction occurs, that you can be treated for that, so you control that. In terms of the risks for pregnant women, we don't know. There hasn't been enough experience to determine whether there are any risks to pregnant women from the vaccine or to fetuses. And so that's, in summary, what I have to say about the benefits and risk. And I'll stop there and see if there are any questions at the end of the next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Correa. Thank you, Dr. Correa. It's always awesome to hear from Dr. Correa. Let me go ahead and share my screen one more time. And don't forget to put your questions in the chat box, and we'll address it as soon as we complete the town hall. If there's time available, we'll love to go ahead and address as many as we can. So up next, we're gonna have, we'll have Dr. Nelson. Give me 1 second. Now, Dr. Nelson Atejortua de la Pena, also known among the colleagues and students as Dr. A or Dr. Nelson. He is a medical doctor, graduated from the School of Medicine, University of Cartagena, Colombia, with a Master's of Public Health from Western Kentucky University as a health education with a health education concentration, and a PhD in health education from Texas A&M University. He rounded his scientific background with a postgraduate training in public health genomics in the University of Science in Philadelphia. And he has been an accomplished professional with several fellowships, the most recent one from the Mississippi Center of Clinical and Translations Research, which is also known as MCCTR. In 2012, he received the Best New Investigator Award from Genomics Groups of the American Public Health Association. Dr. A has been a presenter and a guest speaker at numerous national and international professional conferences and forums, and several, and he has also partaked in several of our town hall meetings. With you, we have Dr. A. I like calling him Dr. Nelson.
And thank you so much, Selma, and either way is fine. Let me start sharing my screen here. How can we see that? Is it up already?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And well, thank you very much to the Health Department for the opportunity to participate here today in this town hall. It is important that we have all this, community outreach because the topic is important. And I want to reinforce a couple of messages. The first one is that yes, the health department is having a survey out there to collect opinions on vaccine hesitancy and opinions about vaccination against COVID-19. So if you have the chance to fill that survey up, please do so, right? And then after my presentation, then we'll have the open forum for questions. And I want to also say that something that I mentioned to my students and to some colleagues, some family members, etc., that topics in public health are always controversial. And my topic today is controversial, right? Talking about the myths and the superstitions that are behind the COVID-19 vaccination. Okay, so I'll make a quick glimpse about the most important ones. I mean, there are many, unfortunately, there are many, and this has created confusion. And that confusion has also limited, in part, the immunization of Hispanics, especially here in Mississippi. You see that number that Dr. Dobbs presented in the very beginning, 1% or less than 1% of all the vaccines that have been delivered to Hispanics. That is a lot low. So we need to do something to increase that number. The first myth, okay, the vaccine is not safe. And we saw that from Dr. Mina, from Dr. Dobbs, and from Dr. Correa, that is not true. It's a myth, okay? Let me share with you these numbers. And the evidence shows that there were only 71 cases, okay, 71 cases of severe allergic reactions out of 17.5 million doses of vaccines that have been applied thus far. I mean, thus far we have almost 24 million doses applied in the United States. When this information was collected, we were around 17.5 million doses. And this is way less than 0.5%. Actually, if you put 5 person or 4 person out of 100,000, that is the proportion that you will get people sick because of the vaccine, okay? So 5 or less than 5 out of 100,000. So that can tell you how safe the vaccine is. On the other side, okay, people have been immunized and there have been 196 deaths. So not even 200 deaths, okay? But those deaths, none of them were attributable to the vaccination. So the person received the vaccine and there were other circumstances, other conditions that caused that person death. And remember that we have been vaccinating people that are 90, 85, 80 years old, and that they have, you know, some comorbidities that are severe. Some of them cancer, some of them cardiovascular diseases, some of them diabetes, or a combination of many other comorbidities. So then 196 deaths and not a single death has been linked to the immunization, okay? Also, there were no deaths happening in the trials. Dr. Mina explained how the clinical trials work, okay? And then there was only one person who died in the AstraZeneca trial. That made the headlines of the newspapers, all the news media, etc. And that person died because of something different to the vaccine. The impact that this death had was that the AstraZeneca trial was stopped for some weeks while this, you know, association in between the vaccine and the death was established or denied. In the end, it was denied, and AstraZeneca's clinical trial has been authorized to keep going. So they are actually ongoing their clinical trial again. But then just to clarify that that death that happened and that caused that study to stop did not have anything to do with the immunization. Okay. Now, second shot is not necessary. Okay, that's another myth. First, we don't have any data right now talking about delayed doses. However, the FDA has issued a statement. And remember that the FDA, as Dr. Mina mentioned, is one of the organizations that are, being very vigilant about the quality of these studies. And the statement says the available data continue to support the use of 2 specified doses of each authorized vaccine at specified intervals. For the Pfizer vaccine, the interval is 21 days, so 3 weeks. So after you have your first doses, 3 weeks later, you have your second doses. And for the Moderna vaccine, the interval is 28 days, almost 4 weeks, okay? And you have a leeway of 4 days in anticipation. So you can have like your second dose, like 3-4 days before the date that you were initially scheduled, all right? And then there is also a recommendation that you don't have a delay in the second doses beyond 6 weeks, okay? So we need the second shot, and we have specific times for that second shot. So here, there is another controversial topic, because there is this gossip that the vaccine, especially the COVID ones, contain fetal tissues. Well, that's superstition. That's not true. Let me tell you, none of the vaccines are using cells or tissues that are coming from any fetus or an aborted baby in any of the stages, not in the design, nor in the development, nor in the production. Same, the vaccines do not contain any eggs or any sorts, not even the ones that you have in the refrigerator. None of those. They don't contain gelatin, latex, or any sort of preservatives, okay? So, but I just wanted to highlight that gossip, that fake news that circulates, that these vaccines contain fetal tissues. They're not. And there is a reason for that, but I'm going to explain in my next slide. Vaccines contain a microchip to control you. Oh, we have heard this a lot. And this is coming from a lot of fake news sites and all that. In the first place, there's not such chip, right? The vaccines do not contain any sort of micro or nano chip that can help control your mind or control anything in your body. That is just not true. And all these come from a video that was suggesting that Bill Gates introduced his technology, but this video was proven to be a hoax, okay? So this is not true, since simply there's no microchip, there's no nanochip, there's nothing of sorts in the vaccines, okay? So vaccines are okay. Now, vaccines will alter your DNA or your fertility, okay? It turns out that Pfizer's and Moderna's vaccines are built around the way that the messenger RNA works. I mean, messenger, as the name says, is something that takes information from one side to another. In this case, the mRNA takes information from the nucleus to another part of the cell and vice versa. But that doesn't mean that the mRNA will be coding anything or will be generating any changes in your DNA. And there are powerful reasons for that, because basically these vaccines do not contain any complete set of all the requirements that are needed to make changes in the DNA. I mean, the things that the vaccine has cannot get into the nucleus. The nucleus is kind of the control room for the whole cell. That's where the orders are given. And that's where the mutations or the changes of DNA happen. And that is not going there. So the messenger RNA is not going into the nucleus. Second, these vaccines, they are RNA, they don't have a very important enzyme that is called the reverse transcriptase. I mean, Dr. Mina is an expert on this because that is the way that HIV virus work. But then for coronavirus, that's not the case. So the vaccines do not contain any of the reverse transcriptase. So messenger RNA cannot be converted into DNA. And there is also a lack of another enzyme that is called integrase, that is like a cement that in the supposed case that the RNA will transform itself in some sort of DNA or piece of DNA that will not be able to integrate with the existing DNA. The other thing is that these vaccines based on messenger RNA do not affect anyone's fertility. And I know there have been some questions about the safety of these vaccines in pregnant women. Although there is not enough data yet to say that they're absolutely safe, one of the stronger arguments in favor of having immunization among pregnant women is that pregnant women are one of the groups that are severely exposed to very dangerous consequences of an mRNA coronavirus infection, including preterm birth. So there are effects of coronavirus, of COVID, among pregnant women, but the effects of an immune or vaccination in the pregnant women are still on the works, okay? So no conclusion yet there, but there is a strong indication that is going to be okay. But so far, we don't say anything yet, okay? Now, there is also the question, okay, how is that we should promote these COVID-19 vaccines? Because we see if we have 1%, less than 1% of the vaccines given to Hispanics, then we need to do something about it. And there's some very useful tips for this. The first one is to tailor messages to the audiences. So we need to come with a lot of, cultural and linguistic competency in the message that we're going to send to the Hispanic community, so they will be more receptive to the idea of having the vaccine, if that is the case, that they're not. Explain the benefits of getting vaccinated, using motivation and not fear, okay? So put it on the positive side always. Be a cheerleader of the process. Use information that is scientifically curated, okay? Just double check for the scientificity of the information that is being used to promote the immunization. You try to avoid any kind of judgmental language when talking about vaccine hesitancy. And I'll be very interested in getting information back from what results had the survey that the health department is actually releasing to the people on that particular matter. And also explain the vaccine developmental and approval process, just like Dr. Mina did, just like Dr. Correa did. How is this approved? Because there are a lot of checks. You see, there are a lot of checks. There's a lot of experts, double, triple checking for everything to be okay, even though in the middle of all this crazy pandemic, and that we only have 1 year of information. Remember, COVID-19 just had the first birthday this January. Last week, we had the first, birthday of COVID. So it has evolved pretty fast. But as Dr. Mina said, we have been able to collect a lot of information. And with all the technology that we have right now, we're able to analyze that and to give solutions to the community in a fastest way. No vaccine had been done so safe and so fast before in the whole history of mankind. Just keep that in mind. Well, thank you so much. And then I guess that we'll move towards the Q&A session. Selma?
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. Thank you. I think that that's a very great start. And let me see. With a couple of questions that we have. The very first one, I think once you say this is the first year of COVID, the first birthday. Dr. Chico, can you do me a favor of highlighting the panelists real quick? So I wanted us to discuss really quickly, can you get COVID-19 more than one? Because I know at the beginning of the pandemic, it was stated that you can only get COVID once. So as research has been developed and as we learn more about the virus, what was ultimately determined?
I can start answering that question. We're still learning, right? Again, it's only been 1 year, so we will have to make sure that everyone and different kinds of population have enough opportunity to get infected, to get exposed again, to see what happens. But a couple weeks ago, there was a paper that came out that basically showed that that about 1% of the population, which is not small, about 1 in every 100, right? Who have COVID can be reinfected of COVID. And the evidence is that when people get reinfected, they're more likely to be asymptomatic, which is a good thing because they're less likely to develop disease. But what they found is that when they do nasal swabs, they find a high amount of virus in the nose, which means that people who have COVID can be infected with COVID. Sometimes they may not know that they got reinfected, and they can spread COVID virus to other people. And therefore, again, it's going to be important, until everyone is protected, for people, even after you had COVID, to continue using, facial masks, washing your hands, and other protective measures to make sure that you don't, if you get infected again, you don't infect others. But it's about 1%. Again, it's not something common. When we're talking about millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people, 1% of a population is quite a lot. 1% of 100,000 is 1,000.
Thank you for that. Does anybody else in the panelists have any other thoughts on it?
No, I think that there have been some case reports about people getting reinfected. And that brings up the question as to whether those people, is there any benefit for them to get a vaccine, people who have been infected? I think that there's some discussion about whether, whether or not they should receive a vaccine. There's no harm in getting the vaccine, so maybe it makes sense for them to get the vaccine.
Right, and I read another article recently. Again, when people get infected, right, not everyone develops protective antibodies. As a matter of fact, 1 in 3 people who get infected don't develop any kind of immunity. And some people who get infected, especially people who develop mild diseases, people who only symptoms were that they lost their sense of smell, they lost their sense of taste, they actually develop very low levels of antibodies. So early data shows that the immune response to the vaccine is actually stronger than the immune response to the natural immunity. So that's the argument that people who had COVID, as long as you had COVID, at least, 14 days after you were diagnosed with COVID, you should be eligible to get the vaccine, and you should get the vaccine.
Yes, and also the other thing is that people might think that because repeating COVID is not that frequent, it doesn't happen. It is important to reinforce it can happen, right? Even though it's not that frequent, it can happen. And that is important to remember. And some people think because, oh, I already had COVID and then I will not need the vaccine, or I'm okay. Don't think like that. That's a mistake, because there might be in some cases, the documentation of the cases have shown that people that had second COVID infection, the second infection was even worse than the first one.
Yeah, I've read of those articles too, and I think it's mainly because it tackles the same organs. So I think it is safe to say, in terms of recommendation, that if you have had COVID in the past, still get vaccinated.
Yes.
That immunity will not last, and we don't know how long each individual, that immunity from having COVID will remain in your body.
Yeah, and we're talking about immunity of 4, 5, 6 months on average. But remember, average can be something in between 0 and 100. So, so then there's nothing for granted there. All right.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Mena, this question is directly to you. I think you'll be best to answer this. Has the vaccine been tried in the Hispanic community? And if so, what have we seen within those numbers?
So yeah, that's a great question. You know, both the Moderna certainly, you know, all the vaccines that have been tried through this network that I mentioned, you know, they're basically being tried in the United States, but they're also being tried, you know, in some countries in Latin America, like in Peru. I can't remember what's the other country. I think Peru, certainly Brazil, and I think Argentina. So there are a lot of Latinos. I mean, in the United States, the Moderna vaccine had about 10% Latino participation. I know the Janssen vaccine had about 10%. So all the vaccine trials have included Latino. Unfortunately, you know, they did not include as many Latinos we wanted to be included, because we really want to, in many of these trials, to have a representation that approximates, you know, the population of our country, right? To make sure that it's a fair representation. But there were many Latinos, both, you know, residents in the United States and residents in other countries in Latin America that participate in these studies. And it was important because, as I say, Latinos, similar to African Americans, are disproportionately affected by this, you know, disease, by COVID-19. So it was important to know, you know, and to learn how effective and how safe these vaccines were going to be in these populations who are needing, you know, these vaccines, perhaps, you know, more than any other racial, you know, more than whites, which is the group that is actually less likely to be affected, or where you see the lower mortality.
What are some of the side effects that we have seen from the vaccination within the community? I know I took the vaccination sometime last month, and I'm waiting for my second dose. So I can attest that, you know, you do feel a little, you know, dizzy. I think it depends on each individual though. So can you guys give us a general question of what is it that you've seen in the medical field when it comes to side effects?
So, so there was a slide, I had a slide that listed some of the more common symptoms, like, you know, some pain, redness on the injection site. The pain can, you know, the soreness, there can be soreness of that injection site for maybe a day or two. Then there can also be some weakness, fatigue, maybe a low-grade fever. But again, generally these symptoms go away. If they happen, they tend to go away within a few days, 3 days or so. There may be other less rare, less common symptoms, but those are the more often reported.
And the fact that there might be some symptoms doesn't mean that you're having the disease, because it's clear that the vaccine does not contain active viruses. So you are not going to have the disease. That's important that the people remember that. You might have a little bit of fever, you might have something, but that doesn't mean at all that you're having the disease. You're having just some effects of the body, the immune system, reacting to the inoculation of certain pieces that will create or trigger that response. And that's the idea of a vaccine.
And I think one thing to remember is that this side effects occur with many vaccines. They're not unique to the COVID vaccine. And they're just a reflection of the fact that your body is reacting to a foreign agent. And that's the normal body reaction to a foreign agent, to try to eliminate it, to consume it and destroy it. And that causes the inflammation and most of those symptoms.
Yeah, I think this is a good question that comes up as well is, we have seen cases where a person becomes positive right after having the vaccine. Can anybody speak on that?
I'm sorry, what's the question, Selma?
We've seen articles, and this goes back into, I think it goes into the myth and stuff. And it's not a myth, it's accurate, of individuals testing positive after getting the first dose of the vaccine.
Yeah, and I can say, Selma, that we've seen, so the vaccine has been available simultaneously with the peak of COVID. And we've seen a lot of people who will get the vaccine and a week later catch COVID because there's a lot of COVID out there right now. And you're not fully protected. And even, and it's not 100%, although it's very good. So it's just, it pretty much seems exactly that people caught COVID around the same time they were vaccinated. And since this is the peak of our activity, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, there might be some overlapping there in the times, but that doesn't mean that the vaccine gave you the disease. So
Definitely not.
For the people to remember. I mean, yes, you might get it. It's not that frequent. There might be 1 or 2 cases here and there, but it doesn't mean that you get it from the vaccine.
Yeah, and this comes up into, I think it's a good reminder, if you guys don't mind, giving us those dates, those timelines, because we know the Moderna has one timeline and the Pfizer has another timeline. So those are 2 different timelines, and we often hear, come back for that second dose, how important it is. So do you guys mind refreshing our minds on the time frame for those vaccinations?
Sure. I will say, for instance, for the Pfizer vaccine, the first dose will give you something in between 55 and 60% immunity. And then the second dose has to happen 21 days after you had the first one. 21. That's the magic number for Pfizer, 21. For the Moderna one is 28 days. So then after the second dose, the data shows that there is at least a 94, 95% protection from either one of the vaccines.
Yeah. So we know Johnson & Johnson has not done theirs. So here comes, I think, a very valid, very good question. In the midst of the different strains that it's coming on board, how can we protect our family with the new strains of COVID? Will the vaccines that we have right now, will they still keep us safe?
So I think, the data that we have right now is that the vaccines that we have right now are, effective and safe against the current, circulating new strains, that are out there. The new strains that are out there, virus, are living, right? And they mutate and they replicate, and they make, they figure out a way to survive. It's natural, selection. So the vaccines that are out there so far, certainly Pfizer tested a vaccine and Moderna, and they seem to be effective, to the strain, the UK and the South African strain. I know Moderna, there was a little bit of less effectiveness that is not really going to affect we don't believe that it's going to affect the effectiveness of all the vaccine, but they actually, were very proactive, and they are redesigning a vaccine, just in case, we need it, because at some point may become less effective. But what's going to happen is, and the reason why we all have to continue, using masks and social distancing is because as long as there is ongoing, transmission of COVID, as at the level that we have it now, once vaccinations are introduced into the community, that ongoing replication is going to increase the probabilities that emerging a virus, that could be resistant will emerge. Luckily, I think what we have, is an amazing technology that we didn't have before. Using, messenger RNA, we can develop, new vaccines that can, be modified in a way that we couldn't do it before to be responsive to these, modifications of the virus that I think will happen anyway, because that's, how that's life, that's natural selection.
Correct. And there has been a statement done by the two main manufacturers right now, Pfizer and Moderna, and they're talking that they're working on a boost dose in case it's needed against the strains, the South African and the British strains that are out there. So they are already working on having an extra shot just in case it's needed. So far, what they say, I haven't seen the data, but they say that the vaccines are good in protecting against these new strains. But let's see, right? Anyhow, they say also that they're working on an extra shot just in case.
Yeah, I think we have so many other questions coming in the chat box, but I think this is a good ending point. I don't know if Dr. Dobbs wants to say a final words to close us out, but to those individuals that have questions, please do me the favor, do me the honor, put your email addresses or your phone numbers. I will go ahead and answer those questions, get as much as information as I can, and either call you, text you, email you, whatever you provide, I will do so. English or Spanish, doesn't matter. We'll see if we can also go ahead and utilize La Noticias page to kind of post all the answers to them, so you'll be able to find it there. Dr. Dobbs, you want to lead us out with a couple words?
Just say thank you, gracias a todos por estar aquí. Y por favor, toma la vacuna. Es la manera en que podemos salir de la pandemia. So, por favor, y si necesitas algo, por favor, vaya a la página web healthyms.com. We have lots of good information there. So please have a good evening.
Thank you to our speakers, everybody that came out and tuned in. Please, if there's anything I can do in my end, let me know. I'm here to help. I am your server. Muchísimas gracias a todo el mundo. Por favor, tome la vacuna, como dice el Dr. Dobbs. Mira, qué buen español. I have placed my email address on the chat box. If you would like to email me personally, your questions, your concerns, I'm here. So,
and we're also available to answer the questions. So please email, mándenle los emails, las preguntas por email a Selma, ella nos las pasa y todos hacemos equipo aquí para ayudar a la comunidad latina en este momento de dificultad.
Sí, muchísimas gracias a todos. Pasen buenas noches.
Good night, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Hasta luego, gracias.
Bendiciones para todos.
Gracias a usted.
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.